introduce you, that would be wonderful. Antonius lectures at St. Cyril's Coptic Theological College within the Sydney College of Divinity in philosophy and natural theology. His research has been in the area of philosophy of mind and cognitive science. He is also a parish priest in Mount Druitt in Sydney, and blessed with a wife, 2 adult children, a little brown dog, and a wise snake. So there. That sounds wonderful. Antonios, you're going to share your screen?
Not right now. I'm going to.
Oh, not right now. Okay.
Yeah, but
Okay.
halfway through, I'll shock you.
Okay,
with
that sounds good.
Complex diagram.
I'll just spotlight you then. Yeah.
Thank you, and I'll beg your forgiveness up front because I'm right in the midst of a flu, which happened to me the last time that I presented at ANZATS. I'm pretty sure I had a flu back then, so I'm starting to wonder if there's some kind of causation going on.
Well, I got COVID last time, so.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
All righty.
Thank you.
I'll just dive in, shall I?
Yeah. Yes, please do.
Christianity stands or falls with miracles. If miracles are impossible, then God was not incarnate as a human being, and Christ did not rise from the dead. The increasingly prevalent view today is a scientific naturalism on which the supernatural, including miracles, are impossible. If all those statements are true, and if the naturalist is correct, then Christianity is in very big trouble. That is the basic background to my paper today, in which I hope to A, lay out the assumptions behind those statements I've just presented, B, challenge some of those assumptions, and C, show that one can be a scientific naturalist and a sincere traditional Christian at the same time, if one understands those terms in a certain way. I'll conclude with some brief observations on a few interesting consequences that might follow from this. Today, miracles are out of fashion in the West, not because they've stopped occurring, but because modernity has largely succeeded in disenchanting the world, unweaving the rainbow, as Richard Dawkins puts it, in the minds of many. The Cartesian and Newtonian views of the world as a machine first isolated the God in the machine and then discarded him altogether. An important part of this intellectual trend is reductionism, the idea that to understand anything, one must take it apart, that the only true understanding indeed are the findings accrued from taking things apart. Thus, in modernity, we have weaved a merry dance of dissembling everything we can, a trend to which Tolkien, under the voice of Gandalf, responds dryly but anxiously, "He that breaks a thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom." I hope you appreciate my Gandalf voice there. Apparently I have the beard for it. One of these reductions has been the dissection of the natural from the supernatural, a distinction that scholars of ancient cultures know better than I was not so clear in pre-modern times. Having isolated physical nature, one can apply the techniques of the scientific method to its study, with often astonishing success and great practical utility. But of course, the same techniques are worse than useless in dealing with the non-physical, or with supernature. And so the very concept of supernature becomes at first less interesting, and then unnecessary, and then an outright nuisance to be eliminated. Which brings us to the question of the miraculous. Eugene Nagasawa laments that a definition of miracles that satisfies everyone continues to elude us. He is a philosopher after all. He suggests this simple definition, which I also shall use here as a stalking horse. Quote, "A miracle is a violation of the laws of nature that is caused by an intentional agent." End quote. Now, if you've been paying close attention, you'll notice that this definition itself assumes that same reductive dissection that isolates the natural from the supernatural. The way you know something is miraculous is that it violates natural law. On one level, this makes perfect sense, both to us and the ancients. People in the first century Palestine knew just as well as we do that it is unnatural to walk on water or rise from the dead or to heal diseases by a word or a touch. But in the modern world, we understand this definition in a much more precise manner. Here is the set of all the things that occur in perfect accordance with the laws of nature. Here is an event that is not part of that set. Therefore, that event is supernatural. And as a corollary, since the laws of nature cannot be broken, then the allegedly supernatural event never happened or is a natural event that has somehow been misunderstood. Now, it is this very assumption of the separation of the natural from the supernatural that I wish to challenge today, and to make a case for what we can call a more holistic view that unites rather than divides, harmonizes rather than sets in competition. It is by no means an original idea and has been part of human thought for most of human history, but most of us moderns have largely forgotten it. So today, I wish to remind us all of it and to apply it to the pressing relevant questions of our own time. As a young fellow in the process of receiving a thoroughly modern and scientific education, I was first introduced to this more holistic view through something that the Christ figure, the lion Aslan, in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe says, in explaining how he has risen from the dead. And this is a quote. Aslan says, I won't do the Aslan voice, that would be blasphemous. Though the witch knew the deep magic, there is a magic deeper still which she did not know. Her knowledge goes back only to the dawn of time. But if she could have looked a little further back into the stillness and the darkness before time dawned, she would have read there a different incantation. She would have known that when a willing victim who had committed no treachery was killed in a traitor's stead, the table would crack and death itself would start working backwards. Since then, this idea has developed in my mind into something like this. We can think of all the laws of physical nature that we know as being a set, as in a mathematical set. This set has been growing throughout the history of human thought, sometimes smoothly, sometimes in fits and starts, sometimes taking wrong turns or unexpectedly veering off in astonishing directions. But always, this set is not only growing as we better understand more things, but also as we understand things more deeply. But few would disagree today that this set, let's call it the set of known physical laws, that this set must be merely a subset of a bigger set of natural laws, which are all the laws of physical nature there are, including the ones we don't yet know. At the end of the 19th century, physicists thought that physics was finished and that there was nothing else of substance left to discover. But within a couple of decades, the relativity theory of the very large and the quantum theory of the very small turned that confidence on its head. The apparent incompatibility of those two central theories suggests almost irrefutably that there are still many crucial things we don't know. But imagine what we would know when, hypothetically, we had come to the end of investigation, as Charles Sanders Peirce would put it. That would include the bigger set of known physical laws plus the currently unknown physical laws, known and unknown combined together to make the bigger set of all physical laws. But is that it? Is there nothing in the universe other than physical stuff? Matter, energy bouncing around in space-time. One can be a naturalist without being a physicalist. That is, one can hold that everything is natural, but not everything is physical. Thus, a realist about numbers or concepts would hold that numbers and concepts are very real parts of reality, playing important causal roles, and yet accept that numbers and concepts are not made up of matter or energy. And if one rejects physicalism, if one accepts, in other words, that there are non-physical components of reality, then surely it is plausible that there be laws that govern this non-physical reality. That is certainly true of maths, for example. Many would argue that it is also true of morality. And now we're beginning to see that even that big set of all physical laws, both known and unknown, may not be the end of the story. If, for example, there are genuine, real moral laws, they would fit neither in known or unknown physical laws, but must form yet another subset of laws. Let's call these non-physical laws. And that there is a biggest set of all that encompasses and subsumes all three subsets, the set of all laws. Or, for those who prefer the diagrams, here comes my very detailed and complex and artistic diagram. And sorry, I've lost my notes now. I just have to find them again. Here they are. We might say that on this view, there is an all-encompassing set of laws. Let's call that omni-nature, O-M-N-I, nature, for convenience. This omni-nature subsumes the set of physical laws we currently know, the physical laws we don't currently know, and the non-physical laws, all together under omni-nature. This kind of subsumption is nothing new in the history of ideas. The four antique elements of earth, water, air, and fire were eventually subsumed into the periodic table of elements, which themselves have been subsumed into the zoo of quarks that are our best model so far of the building blocks of physical stuff. Now, quarks don't mean that we are wrong to speak of fire, or that we should stop speaking of fire, only that we now better understand what fire is. Similarly, Newton's laws of motion were subsumed by Einstein's theories of relativity. This doesn't mean that Newton's laws were wrong. It just means that we now know that Newton's laws are a special case, a subset under certain conditions of Einstein's laws. Newton's laws only go wrong if you're near a black hole or traveling near the speed of light. By extension, the non-physical laws are not contradictory to physical laws, whether known or unknown. They are the laws that reveal the very foundations and, dare I say, the telos of the physical laws. In the poetic words of Gregory of Nazianzus, "You have given solidity to matter, moulding the face of the world and the shape of its beauty therein. You have enlightened the human spirit, endowing it with reasoning and wisdom. Everywhere is to be found the reflection of eternal light, so that in the light the human spirit may find its splendor and become entirely light." End of the quote. And as C.S. Lewis pithily says, in science, we've been reading only the notes to a poem. In Christianity, we find the poem itself. So just as the unknown physical laws will one day illuminate known physical laws, as they always have in history, so also the non-physical laws illuminate physical laws, whether currently known or not, and much else besides. And given their mutual emanation from the one divine source, then, an important aspect of this holistic omni-nature framework is that the subsets of laws are not isolated from each other, but imply each other, are in harmony with each other. They are all part of a single harmonic system of laws. What is more, nature helps to explain supernature and vice versa, as Isaac the Syrian points out. And again, I quote, "Does not even nature instruct us concerning these things? And is there any heavenly thing which cannot be discussed in a comparison which we find in our nature? Even the Lord used to confirm all spiritual things by examples from nature, and in this way he used to establish their power in our souls." End of the quote. And the person then who truly understands and actually lives these non-physical laws is the person who is able to manipulate the physical laws in ways that seem miraculous as Simone Weil says, quote, God has provided that when his grace penetrates to the very center of a man, and from there illuminated all his being, he is able to walk on the water without violating any of the laws of nature. When, however, a man turns away from God, he simply gives himself up to the law of gravity. Then he thinks that he can decide and choose, but he is only a thing, a stone that falls. End of quote. If nature and supernature ever seem to contradict each other, as is the case with miracles, it's not because they actually contradict. They just seem to do so to us because we are ignorant of the relevant laws or of the relations between laws. A miracle on this view is analogous to an event that obeys Einstein's laws of relativity, but disobeys Newton's laws of motion. And it is the disobedience to the narrower set of laws that qualifies it as a miracle. To be succinct, miracles do not break true laws. They only break those rough approximations of the set of all laws that we are pleased to call our cutting-edge scientific knowledge. Thus, the Christian can indeed be a naturalist if one adopts this holistic view of omninaturalism, where everything, even miracles, is in one sense natural, and everything, even butterflies, is in another sense miraculous. All things coming about by the miracle of divine action and grace, and none the less wondrous for being common. We are now ready to bring this model to bear upon some interesting contemporary questions. I want to glance at three such questions today: miracles and the paranormal, the war between faith and science, and the nature of the soul and consciousness. Before I close with a more personal observation about how this model can affect one's own spirituality. By the paranormal, I mean the stuff of spooky TV shows and movies, ghosts and ectoplasms and the like. It might be argued that this omni-nature model can be used not only to accommodate more traditional tenets of faith, such as miracles and Christ's resurrection, but also these stranger things. Here we need to point out the important difference between the possible and the actual. Just because something could happen doesn't mean it does happen. Indeed, the harmony between the subsets of this omni-nature model and their uniform agreement with the telos underwriting them all gives us a method for determining the likelihood of a supposed paranormal event, in addition to all the usual tests of evidence, of course. I would say the same of alleged miracles within the sphere of traditional religion, of course. In my own experience, the vast majority of purported miracles are no such thing in reality. There certainly are genuine miracles, but they are very rare and always for a good cause. They always fit into the scheme of things, shall we say, with beauty and grace. As C.S. Lewis points out so eloquently, this approach also neatly resolves the objection that in performing a miracle, God is breaking his own laws. It should by now be obvious why that is not the case. And this resolution itself has an interesting consequence. It helps to break down all those reductive dualisms, science versus faith, empirical evidence versus intuitive belief, and so on. Mick mentioned a few of them earlier as well. We live in a world increasingly divided, perhaps cloven asunder by dualisms, progressive versus conservative, traditional versus woke. And I think we are increasingly realizing how unhealthy that is for a society. The tone set by the new atheists earlier this century is very much in keeping with this kind of reductive dualism. But many Christians bought right into this assumption. And so we have an arena for polemic battle where there must be a winner and a loser. But is this really the best way to go about things? What would Christian-atheist dialogue look like under the assumptions of omni-naturalism, at least on the Christian side? Of course, there have been many Christians who have indeed taken this kind of approach. If you yourself are a Christian who delights in science and sees science as a valuable path to truth, albeit to a certain kind of truth, and who considered its project as the discovery of God's general revelation in physical nature, and if you nonetheless see that truth is far bigger than anything the very specialized tool that is science can reveal, and if you like your worldview to be harmonious rather than self-contradicting, then it is likely that you are already what I am calling an omninaturalist. And if so, then you have no gripe with the atheist, no war to wage. Rather, you are ready to join hands and search together for that truth. You are ready to let the truth defend itself, or rather himself. Here, however, a little philosophy of science is most helpful, because it seems to me that most of the unhelpful disagreements in these dialogues occur when someone doesn't understand what science is, what it can and cannot do, what its limitations are. Well, one of the things it seems science cannot do, so far at least, is to explain the mystery of consciousness. A highly unusual thing happened last week. A philosopher was in the popular news. Australian philosopher David Chalmers made a wager with scientist Christoph Koch 25 years ago that in 25 years, we would not have a scientific explanation of consciousness. And he won, because we don't. They then renewed their wager for another 25 years, and frankly, my money is on the philosopher. Consciousness continues to stubbornly resist reductive explanation. But reductive materialism is mistaken because it dismisses the immaterial. But Cartesian dualism is mistaken because it dismisses the material. The Eastern Christian tradition has always held that a human being is only fully so when all the parts are there, body, mind, and soul. The material and the immaterial are seen, in a sense, as two sides of the same being, united at a level too deep for us to understand. Modern science has shown that such underlying unities are present in physical nature. Energy and matter turn out to be really the same thing. Electricity and magnetism are really the same thing. So Christians should not be at all uncomfortable that something like neutral monism, the view that inert matter and subjective consciousness might at bottom be two aspects of a single entity, is rapidly gaining ground in both scientific and philosophical circles. This is just one more manifestation of the omni-nature principle. And perhaps the laws that govern consciousness, if there are such things, belong in that largely mysterious subset we call non-physical laws. I'm almost finished. If this sounds like giving too much ground to the naturalist, I prefer to think of it as regaining the ground that always belonged to the Christian in the first place. The God of the gaps objection insists that the gaps in our knowledge that used to be explained by God are shrinking, and the explanatory role of God will one day disappear altogether. But as someone once said, as if God lives in the gaps, of course he doesn't. For in him we live and move and have our being. Echoing Mick once again. We don't need gaps to postulate God. Every elementary particle in the universe, every galaxy, every living or conscious being all cry out incessantly, in Augustine's words, we did not make ourselves, but he who endures forever made us. So long as we view the world in reductive terms, we feel isolated from everything else and from the underlying unifying principle that we call God. When we take the omni-natural view, the connection of everything with everything else, including the physical with the non-physical, the natural with the supernatural, becomes increasingly apparent. And that underlying unifying principle becomes much easier to experience because we are looking for him, not in the gaps, but in every moment and every location of our existence in this interconnected world he has made. To experience one's unity with the creation is one step closer to experiencing one's unity with the Creator himself. Sorry, I went a bit over time there.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you so much, Antonius. That was very clear. Questions for Antonius? Neil.
Yeah, thanks, Antonius. Look, scholastic definition of the supernatural always said it completes and perfects nature, it doesn't destroy it, which seems to me an interesting way of framing the sort of thing that you're talking about, that there's more there than nature can explain, but it's not actually destroying nature, destroying the natural, it's just adding something extra on top of it. Anyway, that's a comment for you.
Yeah, look, I totally agree. My impression is, and I'm not a historian, but my impression is that this really only becomes an issue in the last 300 years or so.
Yeah.
You know, where you have this reductionism and, you know, the world becomes a mechanism and so on. So yeah, definitely scholastics and really most cultures and most philosophies and religions didn't have these clear divisions, I don't think.
Excellent. Doru.
Thanks, Antonius. Our interests converge immensely, I gather. In my 2021 book, I have returned time and again to the topic of what nature is, what is matter, and stuff like that. And in a historical perspective, patristic, if you like, I have pointed out the fact that one, we have this tremendous consistent interest in nature and the natural, let's call them sciences or philosophies of antiquity, that we see throughout the patristic spectrum. And second, there's this sense of nature/matter that is far richer than our modern categories that are binary, divisive, and so on and so forth. And I think there's nothing outrageous about your proposal. It's a common sense return to a tradition which for us Orthodox, well, is the norm. Would you care to comment further on this?
Yes. Yeah, no, look, I agree. And I almost quoted you in my paper as well, Doru, but I didn't want to make you blush. So, and also I had to cut down the word limit. So yes, I have seen your work has actually been really helpful in helping me to formulate my way of thinking about this. Yeah, look, I mean, the other, you know, another maybe observation to make is that, you know, I'm saying that the supernatural is actually kind of natural in a way. We just need to expand our view of nature. But you could also run the argument in the other direction and point to the fact that what we take to be natural, what we take to be physical or material, is actually in so many ways very unnatural. You know, I was reading somewhere that, you know, everything we thought about matter 100 years ago has now turned out to be wrong, right? We thought it was stable. We thought it was solid. You know, it's not. It's mostly made of empty space. And at the very heart of it is this quantum, what's the word? The flu's getting to me. It's not in precision.
Entanglement?
No, yeah, well, that's part of it. Yeah, that, you know, it doesn't seem. Flux, yeah, it's like the wave function hasn't collapsed yet. So, yeah, I don't know, I can't remember the word. So like, you know, even the things that we take to be, you know, natural really aren't natural at all. So yeah, I feel the reason I feel this was worth talking about is not in this circle, but I feel often when I'm speaking to people outside the world of Christianity, all these assumptions are just very, very deeply ingrained. And often we just take them on in the discussion. We accept the assumptions and you know, end up going down rabbit holes. A lot of those discussions, you know, could take a very different direction if you challenge those basic assumptions first. So yeah, I suppose today was an advertisement for a kind of a Socratic aporia, you know, go out and befuddle everyone.
Well, thank you. Anyone got one last question? 2 minutes. Neil.
Just make a comment. It always fascinates me that, you know, we think of the nucleus is composed of neutrons and protons, say. But if you have a neutron by itself, it decays with a half-life of about 11 minutes. Neutrons are sort of stable. And when you put them in the nucleus, they're changed. They're changed. They no longer have that property.